Sorry. Do it again?
Do you know how to clap?
I don't know. I think it's a pregnancy thing.
What?
Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I have a recipe that's really geared toward Hanukkah and the holidays. I'm making Donut Profiteroles. So I'm making donuts because that's what you eat during Hanukkah. It's a fried dough. Usually you eat something fried in oil. But I'm making them into profiteroles, which is like a kind of a fun, classic, fancy French dessert. I had this idea a while back and I was just like, that seems really fun. I want to do that. So really the traditional thing during Hanukkah is jelly donuts, so a filled donut. It's a little bit of a maximalist dessert. It's like donut and ice cream and chocolate sauce, but the donuts themselves are not that sweet. And so I think that it's the richness I'm fine with, but I think it'll be a kind of perfect amount of balance with the ice cream, which is store-bought by the way, the chocolate sauce, and the donut. So really we're focusing on the donut recipe part, which I'm making a brioche. I have my hot fudge that I've already made. Check out the episode where I show you how to make the hot fudge sauce. It's so good. For the brioche, I have bread flour, sugar, a little bit of water, instant yeast, kosher salt, eggs, unsalted butter. One of the most important things to know is that actually all of these ingredients here are chilled. So special equipment mixer, you really, really want to make brioche with a mixer. You'll need a rolling pin to roll the dough out. I have behind me some items. I have a Dutch oven. You just want like a heavy bottomed pot for frying. Anything really works as long as you have a decent amount of surface area and high sides. I have a spider, this little guy for getting the donuts out of the oil. I have peanut oil behind me. You could use a vegetable oil. Any kind of neutral oil with a high smoke point is good. So I'm making a small quantity. This is really kind of like a half quantity of brioche. So I'm using, this is 250 grams of bread flour. It's cold. Again, I chilled it in the fridge. The key to brioche is starting with cold ingredients because it needs a really long mix time. And what ends up happening, especially if you're working in like a warmer kitchen environment, is your ingredients heat up. There's friction that's happening between the bowl and the hook and the dough, and it's gonna get warm, and you do not want that. So when I'm talking about brioche, we're talking about proportions. And brioche is usually around like 50% butter compared to the weight of the flour. So I have 250 grams flour, 150 grams of butter, and then I'm gonna add all my other ingredients except for the butter. So I'm gonna add my sugar, salt, then a teaspoon of instant yeast. I'm going to get this going in the mixer, and I'm gonna add, this is 2 tablespoons of water, about 25 grams. And I'm gonna add my eggs. This is 125 grams of eggs, which ends up being 2 large eggs plus like a little bit, or 2 extra large eggs. One piece of special equipment I didn't call out is my cutter for cutting out my donuts. So I'm just on the first speed here, and I wanna just let everything get incorporated at this stage. We're gonna mix this until I get some good development on the dough before I add the butter. And then after I add the butter, we're gonna continue to mix it for a pretty long time. But it's come together now nicely, and I'm gonna increase the speed. I am going to scrape down the hook. Sometimes what happens with a hook-based mixer is the stuff at the top, like it starts to climb up the hook, and the stuff at the top is wetter than what's down below. Okay, and now I'm gonna continue to mix, and I can increase the speed. Again, it's not such a large quantity of dough, and it's not such an extremely stiff dough that it's gonna pose a problem for a mixer this size. So I'm gonna go onto the second speed. So this is gonna go for another, if I had to guess, I'd say maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll incorporate the butter. But I'll show you how to sort of tell if you're there with your dough. So first of all, it's not really sticky, and it has some nice elasticity to it when I pull on it, and also it's just firm. Like when I press on it, it gives me some resistance. So that's how I know there's pretty good development of this dough. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go back to that first speed, and with the mixer running, I'm going to add the butter. So the butter is still pretty cold from the fridge, and that's what you want. You'll know if you messed your brioche up, because if it's really slack, like it doesn't have a lot of structure and it kind of like oozes out and it's greasy looking, that means everything got too hot. So either the dough was warm or your butter was warm or both. So the butter is kind of at that temperature, because it's been out of the fridge for a few minutes, where it's cold, but it's a little bit plastic, meaning I can kind of like mold it with my fingers. So that's a good point in terms of butter temperature. So I'm going to start adding it a little bit at a time. The amount of butter for this quantity of dough is basically 9 tablespoons, so a stick plus a tablespoon. And I'm just going to use my scraper to just cut pieces off that I'm going to then add to the bowl. Now, if your butter is really, really cold, what happens, and also if it's the type of butter, because all butter has a different texture to it depending on the brand. If it's the kind of butter where it's really brittle, so it's gonna like break apart when it's cold, this is a pretty like flexible, malleable butter. If your butter though is hard and rigid and would kind of shatter when it's cold, let it warm up a little bit. You want it to have a little bit of pliability. So I'm going, not really cutting straight, it could be a little more than a tablespoon at a time, but maybe not more than 2. You're just kind of waiting for the butter to incorporate before adding more. And here periodically I will scrape down the hook to make sure that, again, there's like that stuff, that dough that's kind of stuck toward the top of the hook that I want to get better mixed into the rest of the dough. So I'm going to give it a scrape. And this is going to really transform the texture once that butter is added. It's going to give the dough a lot of elasticity and make it like super supple. So back on that first speed. So as I mentioned earlier, brioche is a dough that you really cannot work with room temp. It has to be cold. So we are going to chill this, and it's going to chill overnight. So I did make one already that I'll pull out, but that's part of what makes it really flexible. And it's so versatile. This is what I use for donuts. It's what you can use for hamburger buns. I mean, a particularly rich hamburger bun. You can use it for all sorts of like sweet buns, cinnamon rolls, like a million other things. I'm ready to add that final piece of butter. And it's been on low. And now I'm ready to increase the speed. You can see that the dough has really lost its form, its structure. And now we want to increase the speed and work the dough to regain some of that strength. So I'm going to turn it up into the second speed. And this is going to go for a while. Fortunately, the dough is nice and cool still because of the cold butter and the cold ingredients that we started with. And you'll see it's going to come back together. It's going to gather around the hook, and it's going to start to look more like a dough again. But this is going to take a little while. This could be like anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. I would say it's been, I didn't really time it. I would say it's been more than 5, but fewer than 10 minutes. And you can see the dough has really come back together. And it's quite soft. It doesn't look greasy. That's really important. So I know that it hasn't overheated. You do want to do this, if you can, in a cool kitchen. So I'm going to scrape this out so you can sort of take a closer look. One of the ways that I know that it's kind of at the point where I can stop mixing is there's some structure to it. So when I press on it, like it gives me a little bit of resistance. There's some elasticity. So I'm going to form it into a ball, which you do with the help of a bowl scraper like this and just kind of rotating it and moving it across the surface. This is going to go into a clean bowl. And most of the fermentation for brioche happens in the fridge, but we're going to let this sit out at room temperature for 30 to 60 minutes, 30 minutes to an hour, because that's going to help kind of jumpstart the development of some flavor in the dough. And then I'm going to show you a series of folds where we're going to kind of use this folding process to both rebuild strength and knock out the gas before I refrigerate it. So this is the kind of thing where you can do this the day before. You can make the donuts at any point on the second day. It has like some flexibility as far as timing. it can hang out in the fridge for a little while. So I'm just gonna set this aside at room temp. But I do have a dough that I already made last night. So I'm gonna show you what this looks like and what that process is like to get it into the fridge. But then I'm gonna use the cold dough that I made last night for shaping the donuts. So I'm going to speed up this process and just grab the dough swap. So that is the brioche that I made last night that has been chilling in the fridge. I'll circle back and show you what the brioche looks like after it's proofed and just how to get it into the fridge. But I forgot to prep one thing, which is a piece of parchment paper that I cut into little squares. So I'm gonna do that. Sorry, it's gonna take a minute. Basically what I'm gonna do is when I punch out my donuts, I'm going to place them on individual squares of parchment paper. It's gonna help me get it into the oil so that I don't end up misshaping my donuts at all. So I'm just cutting squares. But now I'm gonna grab that cold dough, a little bit of bench flour, my rolling pin, and my cutter. So my cutter, this one is, let's see, I didn't measure it. This is just from like a set of ring cutters or biscuit cutters. It's just shy of 2 inches. So I wanna make the donuts small enough. It's kind of like gonna be like somewhere between something that's like a jelly, like a filled donut size and a donut hole. So I think this will be nice, and I want to make them small enough because I want to serve them like profiteroles where it might be like more than one per serving or per order. So I'm just going to grab that dough. So here's that cold brioche. One thing that I did after it had been rising for maybe 12 hours or so is I punched it down. You can see how it's been flattened. It had gained a little bit in volume because it goes into the fridge room temp, and then it takes a little while to cool down. So in that time period, it's sort of starting to, ferment. So I did punch it down. I'm going to scrape it out onto my work surface. So just a little bit of flour. You can see the dough is really firm, and that's because the butter is, butter when it's cold is firm. So it's really easy to work with. All right, so this looks good. Make sure you don't have any sticking on your surface. And now I'm just gonna start punching. Sometimes it's helpful to get a little bit of flour on your cutter. And then each punched out round is gonna go on a piece of parchment. So one thing I like to do is press all the way down until you hit the surface and then give it a twist. And then it helps to release that dough. So I'm gonna space them out really close together because I want to maximize my yield. Okay, so I'm going to finish cutting, and then I'm going to attempt one round of re-rolling the scraps and punching out, but they're never as good. So those will just be for us to snack on. While these are proofing, I'm going to start getting my oil hot for frying, and we want to fry at 350. So I'm going to start to bring that oil up. And I don't need a ton of oil. I'm not making a ton of donuts. But I'm using a Dutch oven because it has nice high sides. It just is like a nice safe vessel with even heating for frying. So these are gonna hang out, and we'll kind of move over here. I got a gallon of peanut oil. Peanut oil is a great frying oil. I want to have at least 1 inch of oil in the bottom of this pot, a little bit more, because they just need some room to swim around. So I'm not gonna give a quantity of oil because it depends on your vessel. I'd say that's good. It's probably between 25% and a third full. With deep frying, just because there's displacement that happens when you add the food, and again, if it's really wet, it's going to bubble up, so you just don't want to go very high. So I'm going to get this heating on medium high, and I'm going to use my instant read thermometer. I was recently watching something about, just talking about like thermometer technology, and that the clip-on ones do tend to be pretty inaccurate. So I do like my instant read thermometer, which I know is very, very accurate. So this is just gonna help me monitor the oil temp. Harris has a weird sixth sense when it comes to deep frying where he doesn't temp the oil and he just like knows. I'm not that good at it. So I also have, you always want a kind of like mise en place with your frying if you're deep frying at home. So I have my cooling rack. So what you don't want to do is like be frying your donuts and then they're perfect golden brown and then you're like, oh my gosh, I have to go find a cooling rack and then they're overcooking. So I have this set here. It should be in a sheet tray, but I ran out. So it's just on paper towel. So the oil is reading 349, okay, 350. So think medium is a good temp. I'm going to turn on the hood because once I add the oil, there's going to be some bubbling. It's going to start to smell. So I'm just going to get that going. But first I'll show you just kind of quickly what the proofed donuts look like. You can see when you get like a side view that they've expanded. And when I press down, I feel they're nice and light. I feel the air underneath. And when I press, it springs back but leaves a slight indentation. So that looks nice and proofed. So I'm going to get these in, and you're going to understand why I have them on parchment paper. And that's because I'm going to actually just put the entire piece of parchment into the oil and then slide the donuts off. So this is so I don't have to like adjust the shape. This is more important if you're actually cutting the hole out of the donuts and they're bigger. And when they're bigger, they're more delicate and easier to kind of misshape. Here it's like not such a big deal, but it's just a good technique for making donuts at home. So these are going to go into the oil. And after a couple seconds, you can slip it off of the parchment. So see how it's not vigorously bubbling? There's just some gentle bubbling because it is still losing moisture. I'm a little bit underproofed because this is my first donut that's been in here for a couple minutes. Do you see how the equator around the donut is darker than the poles? And that's because it hasn't proofed enough that it gains so much air that it actually floats above the surface. And what I want is actually the opposite. I want browning on the top and bottom and a pale ring around the middle. I mean, it's still going to be good, but these could go a little bit longer basically. So that's another thing about making donuts and proofing is obviously the ones that you have sitting longer that you fry last are going to proof more. And just to be safe, use tongs to take off that parchment paper. So I'm just going to get these going in batches, adding a few at a time, making sure that I'm monitoring the temp, and we're just gonna fry all of our donuts. And they only take like a minute or two on each side. So the donuts are fried, and they're gonna just cool for a couple of minutes, and while they're cooling, I wanna just show you the dough that I made earlier. So this is ready to go into the fridge. It's been proofing for about an hour at room temp, and I'll just show you what I do to the dough before I put it in the fridge. Again, you don't want like a really, you don't want extensive buildup of gases. So I'm just going to do a series of folds where I'm going to take the dough and I kind of fold it onto itself and pat down and do that a couple of times. And that kind of stretching motion with the dough helps to strengthen it. So as the dough sits and ferments, it sort of, those gluten bonds sort of weaken. And so that folding helps to knock out some of the gas, reform some of those bonds, and you can see I've kind of degassed it. So this is going to go back into the bowl, covered, and into the fridge. So it can go into the fridge. And the fridge really helps to develop a lot of flavors. So even as little as like 4 hours is beneficial to the overall texture and flavor of brioche. You can go up to a day and a half. So this is going to go in there, and then I'll make something delicious with this brioche tomorrow. I have all the components for my profiteroles, but instead of pâte à choux, and they kind of look like pâte à choux, I have my little donut holes. I'm super excited. So this is my hot fudge. Harris and I both ate some over ice cream last night. It was so good. So here it is. It's like super glossy and smooth. So I am going to pick 3 of the nice, they're such beautiful golden brown donuts. I'm going to split them. What direction is this? Lengthwise? Crosswise? I'm going to split them through the equator. I'm going to put them on my plate. And now 3 little scoops of ice cream on top of each one. Then the donut tops go back on. So now I'm going to top my profiterole. Okay, so I've made profiteroles before. I've made donuts before. I've made hot fudge before. I hadn't really put them all together like this until today, but I would say my vision has been realized. This is exactly how I pictured it coming together. I love the way the hot fudge coats the profiteroles, and you get, ideally, some of that temperature contrast. And some of my favorite desserts are desserts with temperature contrast. A warm component, a cold component like ice cream. So good. All right, I'm gonna taste. All right, I got a little bit of top and bottom donut plus chocolate sauce. It's something totally different than a profiterole, actually, in a great way. I love having that brioche texture in there because you still get a little bit of crunch from the outside of the donut, and of course you get the creamy ice cream, but you get this other thing, which is like the silkiness of the brioche. Chocolate sauce. Honestly, if you make anything for the holidays, try making the hot fudge. It's so good, so well balanced. It's so not overly sweet. Maybe 3 is a lot for one portion, but you could definitely eat one and feel amazing. So delicious. It reminds me why I love brioche, why I love this hot fudge recipe. When you add a little vanilla ice cream to the mix, you get the hot cold. It's so good. I really wish Harris were here so we could try it. Oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna finish eating this one. And I hope you learned something about brioche. Maybe you try frying donuts at home for Hanukkah or just for the holiday season, or you just make the hot fudge. You can put them all together and it's something so spectacular and delicious. I love it so much. So anyway, I'm gonna sit here and enjoy the remainder of this profiterole, share the rest. So good. I hope you have very happy holidays, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.